Hello guys, welcome back to a brand new video on NexPad Game Reviews with Liam. So if you guys did check out the last video, which was first impressions for the Marvel Avengers game. So on this video for today, I'm going to be giving you guys my opinionated full review of the whole game. Now it's interesting, but before that, we slide through for the intro. So in this video, we definitely are going to be talking like a little bit more in depth as to the Avengers Marvel game. And in one way, it's sort of like most of what I said in the first video. So in case if you didn't get to see the first video, it's somewhere in the description. Possibly we'll leave a link somewhere here. And you can check that out and kind of like see my first impressions about the game. But now that I have gone full-fledged deep down into the game, which is a really long game. Like when I think of it, it's more like I think you'd spend, let's say, roughly like 10 hours playing the game. So it's kind of like it's a whole lot of time. But first off, I would like to say welcome to the channel again. So now let's take a closer look at this game that was created by Crystal Dynamics and published by Square Enix. Anyways, first off, for those of you who are sort of new to the channel, so I am Liam, definitely this is NexPad Game Reviews, and I look at video games and tell you based on how I personally do feel about them, if they are actually good games to buy to play, or to play to buy, depending on which one comes first for you. But nonetheless, I did play the Avengers video game, and in one way, I can say the game is decent is the word. I remember like from the first video that I made, we sort of like looked at it that, okay, yeah, this was going to be like some interesting big hype. Actually, there wasn't really like a huge hype around this game, at least not compared to what we had as to Last of Us or Ghost of Tsushima. But nonetheless, I think this game sort of like delivered on some parts, but didn't really do all too well on other parts. So first off, let's jump into the storyline. Now, you guys, I do not want to give you a lot of spoilers, so I sort of like would still say sort of like the same thing I said in the first video. We are going to sort of like be entering into the whole Avengers story from the protagonist, Kamala Khan, aka Miss Marvel. So if you sort of like have seen Stretchy in Indomitables, that's sort of like how her superpowers roll. So she has kind of like stretchy arms, can increase in size, something like similar to what Ant-Man can do, but not. It's more like stretchy in Indomitables. So with the storyline goes, you sort of like you go for some convention, and then bad guys come, and then there is an attack, and then blah 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 blah. The Avengers story kicks off. So at first you sort of like get to go through the heroes, but that's one thing. Like the roster is sort of like limited. So so far we just sort of like had throughout the game anyways, although don't let me rush it. Anyways, you get to use Captain America, Hulk, Iron Man, Black Widow, and who haven't I mentioned? Thor, and then of course Miss Marvel. So those are sort of like the playable characters in the game so far. Now, the reason I said so far is because I want to believe somehow that Crystal Dynamics possibly would bring like an update, something similar to what Mortal Kombat did with Aftermath. So sort of like brought new storyline, gave us new playable characters, stuff like that. So maybe we'll get to see like more characters, because in a way, this is not, don't consider this a spoiler, but in a way like, you know, Eagle Eye, some characters that you sort of like would still encounter in the game. I hope those ones get to sort of like come out. But overall, the storyline, I would say it's more like, I won't call it like a unique storyline, because the game in itself sort of like makes that storyline, it stretches it too long, kind of like pushes it to be a bit repetitive, kind of like, it's more of a dynamic, I said dynamic, it's more of a mechanical game than a dynamic one. So things sort of like just follow a similar pattern in a way. But all the same, I would still say it's a very good game. So for the storyline, personally, I feel like the storyline is sort of like, I rate like around, I'm trying not to be biased on this. It's somewhere between a 3 and a 4, but it's somewhere between a 3 and a 4. it's not exactly 3 and it's not exactly 4 either. So I think I'll just kind of like say it's 3.5 on this one. So the storyline is pretty decent. You sort of like get to Williams, do not give the spoilers. Thank you. So moving on to the graphics. Now the graphics of the game sort of like did do well. Yeah. So like I said in the first video, the graphics of the game sort of like, I wouldn't say overly impressed me. Now, actually, the graphics for the gameplay is good, but at some point they still didn't deliver on like so many places. Okay, let's say for instance, for your upgrades, where you kind of like upgrade perks and all that cool stuff. For astonishing superheroes, let's take Iron Man for example. Most of your upgrades are not like, they are not cosmetic upgrades. Like you can get skins, those are like a different thing, but more like, let's say I decide to use like a different repulsor for Iron Man. It doesn't give me like some extra attachments or stuff, so it's kind of like this holographic upgrade that the game tells you you have, and you sort of like see it in the gameplay. Not really though. It's in the gameplay, somehow it influences the gameplay, especially fight scenes, but it doesn't really captivate us to that point. And one way or the other, the graphics itself is actually, it's good to play, but I think in a way, if you then merge like the graphics and the gameplay, which we definitely will be getting to like just right after graphics, I would say graphics would kind of like fall, let's say 4 out of 5. Graphics kind of like be 4 out of 5. Yeah, they did a pretty nice job. Although some of it, or I'll say most of it, especially for like the aim labs that you sort of like raid and all of that stuff, is mostly repetitive. Like the design, it's sort of like if you get to see a particular one, they sort of want to almost follow the same kind of thing. But nonetheless, I think for me, graphics would sort of like make it to 4 out of 5. Then let's head over to gameplay. Now for gameplay, the gameplay doesn't suck because fight scenes are actually awesome, but in a way, movements and actually fight scenes, let's kind of like look at fight scenes for example. So you have a roster of Thor, Iron Man, Black Widow, Hulk, and Miss Marvel. Did I miss anyone? Kind of like, yeah, and Captain America. So it's basically the same controls for all of them. But of course, like the visuals kind of like influences how that control influences the character. What that means in plain English is Thor throws the hammer, Iron Man uses the repulsor gloves, Captain America throws the shield. So it's sort of like the same buttons for kind of like that same sense of similar attack. But the thing is, for it being that way, it's better for me. It's better on some characters than others. For instance, I did not exactly enjoy using Iron Man as a character. Now, Iron Man, to some extent, at some point, I actually got the hang of Iron Man, especially like with flying and, you know, fighting from the sky and kind of like shooting repulsor gloves. For me, I didn't necessarily enjoy it, but when I got to use characters like Thor and Black Widow especially, now it actually was really cool. Like those buttons, I would say, it's not the buttons per se, it's just the gameplay. I think they sort of like made it something generic and they just fused it into one, which sort of like makes sense, because I think if they sort of like try to displace it and make a unique thing for each character, then that'll kind of like mess up the whole game, because in the real sense, you still even have like a lot to deal with as to combat style and all of that stuff. Although one good part with the gameplay is it sort of like allows you to variate in the kind of, let me not just use the word fighting style, but for instance, if you are more like the counter-attack kind of like fighter, yeah, the game you sort of like can not just customize, can push your perks towards that direction. And if you kind of like Hulk Smash, all-out brawler, you sort of like can also use your perks to do that. Although the not so great part about all of that, like I said, is most of those upgrades are sort of like repetitive, and in a way there's no cosmetic visual upgrade to all of it. So it's kind of like, okay, the game tells you, okay, you've upgraded this and then that's it. There's nothing necessarily fancy in any upgrade you have, which in a way sort of like then drags me on. I think the fight scenes at first, like even actually up to like the end of the game, fighting still kind of like were nice, but at some point I kind of like it felt like a chore. Or fighting felt like a chore. Like because for the guys you fight, they are kind of like just similar sets of bad guys, or of course with different variations. So, but the fightings are kind of like that repetitive. So, as cool as they look, when you get to play it, especially for a game that long, it's actually like, I would say it's a long ass game actually. Like, relatively, it's long. So for some missions, some characters are obviously better than some. Especially like if you would get to go against a lot of guys and you just want to like smash and break everywhere. That's Hawk is better for stuff like that. If you want to use someone like Iron Man, I wouldn't say Iron Man is passive in the game, but for me, everything's sort of like jumbled up. So that gameplay, I'll kind of like say falls around 3 for me for the gameplay. So gameplay ranks about 3. I think there's more detail to it actually. So it's not just like a biased review, because if you actually get to play the game, you would have a good sense of what it is I'm saying. And let's move on to multiplayer. So on the multiplayer sort of like gets really interesting. Now the thing is, multiplayer is more of like co-op, so it's nothing like what we had in Injustice, the video game. So Injustice is sort of like similar to Mortal Kombat, where it's like Flash against Dr. Fate, that kind of thing. No, it's more like it's a co-op mission. Obviously, it has to be a co-op mission. But the thing is, you don't get to have extra characters, of course. You still get to use the same characters in the rosters, depending on the characters you have unlocked. So it's kind of like all of that into one. But it's really exciting. Leave the aspect of, or I won't say leave the aspect of, but if you look closely at the multiplayer fun, I think the magic is actually in the multiplayer fun, not necessarily like, the game is great, but when you get to sort of like join a friend, let's say Black Widow, Iron Man go on a mission together, that kind of energy you get. So it's more like you get to live the Avengers vibe and fire all again. And trust me guys, the multiplayer fun, in a way, takes the game, it sort of like lifts the rating, because for me, I'll sort of like say the multiplayer fun is sort of like around 4 out of 5. So that kind of like, that kicks it really good, really good. And moving on to the replay value. Now, for those of you who possibly are new onto the channel, what replay value simply means is how well will I be willing to play the game all over again. And truthfully, guys, as much as I did enjoy the game, because honestly I did enjoy playing the game, because Marvel Avengers are kind of like one of, I won't call it an iconic game that we've been waiting for, but like one game that as it launched I was excited to play, and I actually was excited to play it, and I sort of like, I enjoyed playing all through. Even at some points it sort of like I felt like I was repeating stuff, but still, especially when you start to play unique story missions, those ones are kind of like, they're real bangers, guys. So with all of that, still my view on the replay value isn't actually a lot. Maybe because the storyline is too long. It's not because the storyline is too long, because honestly, every time I think about a storyline being long, I always refer back to God of War. For me, God of War is like the best game ever made, which I think now that I say it, I sort of like, I go in the faces of a lot of other games that I've enjoyed. So I do not take that back, but I do not say that that's kind of like the final. So because guys, not like I like to say different stuff on the channel, but God of War so far for me is like, it's my best game on PlayStation 4 so far. Although I have other games exciting, but we are not talking about any of that. We are talking about this Marvel Avengers, the video game. So, but for the replay value, guys, I think for me, I'm sort of like going to put like, I wouldn't necessarily play it a second time. I could, but I don't think I would necessarily do, because I don't know. It's not like I would be able to sort of create a new unique storyline as to what it is I had played before. So there is not necessarily really new to look forward to. So for me, replay value sort of like fall into like 2. That's for me personally. Now, I know a lot of you guys who are super fans of the Avengers and Marvel universe definitely would love to enjoy and knock yourselves out with this game. I'm a fan. I'm not really the biggest fan for the Marvel universe, but nonetheless, this game is good. But for me, I wouldn't necessarily play it again, so it's kind of like falls on that rating of 2. So right guys, if we kind of like do a recap on all of that. So for the storyline sort of like hits it around 3.5. For the graphics really good. So gameplay launches like around 3. For the multiplayer, which I really say, yeah, that kind of like kicks the excitement of the game, like pushes it up. So that's more like 4. Then for the replay value, and that replay value is more like on my terms, but still, that's still how I see the game. So definitely we'll still be using it in the ratings for this video game. For me, it's sort of like 2, and it will sort of like crack up those numbers. There you have it, guys. It's 3.3. But if you ask me to look at it face value, I'll kind of like say from what is I have played, this game sort of like falls into 3.8. But you know, based on the numbers we sort of like we did and we ran through just now, it's more like it's a 3.3. But I think maybe out of my bias, I sort of like would then push that ranking by, let's say 0 point whatever. Then we sort of like put this game around 3.8 nonetheless. Nonetheless, if there is one favorite Marvel Avengers character of yours, which is a long sentence to say, be sure to drop down in the comments below who your favorite Marvel character is and tell me why. I think for me, my favorite, based on the game, and I think in general, would be, I feel very attracted to Black Widow for some interesting reasons, obviously. And now that I say it, I sort of like don't want to take it back, but it's between Black Widow and Thor. It's between the both of them. So who do I go for, Black Widow or Thor? Well, I think I would be putting that out later, but nonetheless, I'd like to hear what yours is. And with all of that being said, thank you guys for sticking up to the end of this video. I am Liam, and if you did enjoy today's video with Marvel Avengers and you are also excited for next gen consoles, be sure to like this video. If you want to see more game reviews that I do on the channel, be sure to subscribe and hit the notifications bell so you sort of like get notified every time I drop a new video. And without much talk, OBACAT signing out. Down the barrel. Up, pooch, pooch.